So I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise anymore that Tulsi Gabbard seems adamant about making all of the right enemies. In a recent speech that she delivered in front of Congress, she gives a harsh and damning critique of Saudi Arabia, their influence on international terrorism, and basically their advocacy for war in Yemen based off of their personal agenda, which has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni people. Take a listen.
The United States' support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen, with no authorization from Congress, has resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Yemeni civilians. The U.S.-Saudi coalition has dropped bombs on children in school buses, on people in markets, and on families who are celebrating weddings. They've left millions of Yemeni people on the brink of death from famine, disease, starvation, a lack of access to clean water, sanitation, and health care. This has created the worst humanitarian crisis in a generation. Now, earlier this week, the Trump administration threatened to veto this critical legislation, should it pass Congress. This legislation that would end U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen by spreading blatant lies. They've said that this legislation draws, quote, constitutional concerns, and they say it would affect our ability to prevent the spread of violent extremist organizations. But here's the truth. First, the United States' support for this war in Yemen is unconstitutional. Congress has not authorized it. And second, Saudi Arabia is not our ally, and U.S. continued support for this war in Yemen is strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. Recent CNN report documented how Saudi Arabia is literally taking the U.S. weapons that have been provided to them in this war in Yemen and handing them off to Al-Qaeda on the ground in Yemen, the very same terrorist group that attacked us on 9/11.
So, I don't think it should be that big of a surprise to anybody right now that Saudi Arabia is, once again, like Tulsi Gabbard said, not our ally. They're not our friend. And the truth of the matter is, as the current government, along with the neoliberals who have decided to join in on beating the war drums for Venezuela, they're trying to claim that they're in Venezuela right now or they're trying to get into Venezuela right now to respond to a human rights atrocity, that Maduro is a genocidal maniac. And you know how the spiel goes, right? The same spiel that was used for Mossadegh, same spiel that was used for Fidel Castro. Basically anybody that where we need their sources, whether they are good or bad, no matter how they're actually perceived in the international community. Like Fidel Castro is seen as a hero in the international community, including, like I said, Nelson Mandela, and those who fought beside Fidel, but we called him a mass murderer and a killer. And it was because, well, the truth of the matter is he did represent a conflict of interest with the United States, but it wasn't with the people. It was with its corporations who were attempting to basically maintain that apartheid that was taking place in Cuba at the time. So when you have an administration trying to pretend as if human rights is the reason that they're going into countries, and meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is actually getting away with real genocide as we speak. And for some reason, all of a sudden, now it's a debate as to whether or not we should go and remove all funding and all help, and even go take steps even further by holding Saudi Arabia accountable in the International Criminal Court, initiating sanctions, and potentially an embargo against Saudi Arabia, considering that we are now, if you want to use oil as an excuse, it's not an excuse that we can really use anymore, because we are the leading producer of oil. We are one of the main exporters of oil now as well. So like, if that was the excuse before, it shouldn't be the excuse anymore. The truth of the matter is, not only can we not allow Saudi Arabia to get away with this, but they must, in my opinion, be punished 100%. So that's why I love what Tulsi Gabbard had to say. But this isn't just Tulsi Gabbard. Like she said, even MSNBC discussed how just reckless Saudi Arabia has been with dealing with the Yemeni genocide. And Forbes has also addressed this, because it isn't only just their own hand that they have been invoking, but they've also been allowing money laundering, which would eventually uplift and promote terrorism. So This is a Forbes article, September 25th, 2018. Saudi Arabia accused of turning a blind eye to international terrorism financing by a global watchdog. Saudi Arabia has been strongly criticized for its failure to tackle money laundering and international terrorism financing in a new report, which will make uncomfortable reading for the authorities in Riyadh. A report published on September 24th by the Financial Action Task Force, an intergovernmental body based in Paris, said that Saudi Arabia is not effectively investigating and prosecuting individuals involved in larger scale or professional money laundering activity, and is not effectively confiscating the proceeds of the crimes. It also pointed out to the lack of attention paid to financing of terrorist groups outside of the country. So there's a lie that's perpetuated constantly by our Department of Justice that Iran is a leading sponsor of terrorism. Let's be very clear about it. Iran isn't even top 3. They're not even top 5. I would say that United States is between 1 and 2. Saudi Arabia comes in a close second. I would say Israel strongly takes part in that as well. A lot of the UAE countries. So they put Iran up there because they wanted to create the perspective or convey the idea that basically Iran is, they want to paint the picture that Iran is our enemy, right? That Iran is dangerous. And not only do they present a clear and present danger for the United States, but they present a clear and present danger for the entire world, which simply isn't the case. It's crazy how all these countries with no nuclear weapons, even if they're attempting to build one, they don't have a nuclear weapon, but they're a clear present danger to the world. But countries like Israel, that, I mean, it's ran by sociopaths and psychopaths and actual racists. They have a nuclear weapon or 2, I believe, and nobody seems to mind them because they're a democracy, right? So, while acknowledging that prioritizing domestic concerns is understandable, the report also said that the almost exclusive focus of authorities on domestic terrorism financing of offenses means that the authorities are not prioritizing the disruption of terrorism financing, support for threats outside of the kingdom. In other words, if they're concerned about the finance of terrorism, and it's only when it comes to the interests of Saudi Arabia domestically. They don't want to make sure that Saudi Arabia doesn't suffer from domestic terrorism. And to be quite frank, they don't really, which is peculiar, right? You would think if they weren't, it's kind of like a United States, right? So we have terrorist attacks, but we don't really have a lot. I mean, the couple that we have had in the past, you know, Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these other countries have infinitely more, right? But it seems like the countries who are being charged by the international community with financing directly or indirectly most terrorism around the world don't suffer that many terrorist attacks. Even in Israel, they have attacks, but it's mostly by people from Palestine who are retaliating. It isn't from like Al-Qaeda or ISIS most times, which is really weird, by the way, especially in Israel, given the history with them in the Arab world. So, and their connections to the United States. So the sums involved in all of this could be large. The proceeds of crime in Saudi Arabia are estimated to be anywhere between 12 billion and 32 billion. The main areas where criminals are making money are thought to be illicit trafficking in narcotics, corruption, and counterfeit piracy. Most of the profits go elsewhere, with an estimated 70 to 80% of the proceeds of crime leaving the kingdom. So in other words, when they confiscate assets, what we would call civil forfeiture, it's going somewhere and it's not being held accountable. You know, that's funny. It sounds similar to when the CIA lost trillions of dollars and we don't know where that's at either. And that was just called an accounting error. Now, back to what Tulsi said about them not being our ally. She would also be right about that because we pretend as if they are our ally by doing things like looking the other way when it comes to their clear human rights atrocities, right? I mean, when a woman got beheaded for dancing in the street, right? Women are very much so oppressed because the type of religious doctrine that they follow isn't actually of the Islamic faith. I want to be very clear about that. People oftentimes misconstrue what Saudi Arabia is, right? They think that Saudi Arabia practices the same type of Islamic teachings as like Jordan or Qatar or Palestine, for example. They don't. They practice what's called Wahhabism, and Wahhabism was actually propped up in Saudi Arabia by Great Britain. Why? Because, well, the truth of the matter is Great Britain needed, basically how we needed Israel in the Middle East. Great Britain uplifted the royal family in Saudi Arabia in the same fashion so that they could have a piece, a controlling interest, if you will, of Saudi Arabia. And the deal, just like with the United States, this isn't a coincidence, people. What do we do whenever we institute regime change and take over a country or colonize a nation? We institute a right-wing theocratic regime most times. So although Saudi Arabia was established much earlier, because this is whenever Great Britain still had control of like Palestine and other countries or territories in the Ottoman Empire, it was still the same idea. If you get a liberal left-wing government, they will eventually take back control of their nation and put it in the hands of the proletariat or the people or the populace. So they put a right-wing royal family and make sure that the kingdom can't be passed down to anyone else, which is why it seems like Saudi Arabia is somehow, despite all the human rights violations, they don't have any sanctions. In fact, they're prospering beyond belief. They seem like they're very behind in a lot of their practices. Like when it comes to their religion, when it comes to how that religion affects their laws, but also they're ahead technologically, they're ahead economically. Meanwhile, while simultaneously destroying other nations and getting away with it. Now, this article or this finance form gives us a little insight as to why they're able to get away with it. According to Open Secrets, and this is as of October the 23rd, 2018, not that long ago, Saudi Arabia foreign agents, political donations top 1.6 million in the 2018 elections. Political donations made by foreign agents hired to act on behalf of Saudi Arabian interests have exceeded 1.6 million in just the 2018 election cycle, according to the news analysis by the Center for Responsive Politics. Of the money flowing into the United States elections from lobbyists, political operatives, firms, and other foreign agents who have disclosed contracts to represent the political interests of Saudi Arabia and the United States, political donations from operatives working for Saudi Arabian interests exceed 500,000 in 2018. And while PACs affiliated with lobbying, public relations firms, and others added an additional 1.1 million for that particular election cycle. The total amount of political donations made by Saudi foreign agents is a conservative estimate by CRP. So that's conservative. 1.6 million is like, probably more, but we'll go with 1.6 million because we can't really prove the rest. It excludes individual lobbyists or operative contributions to their firms affiliated with or their firms affiliated PACs to ensure that no funds are double counted. So it means that the total flow of money to politicians from lobbyists, firms, and political operatives representing Saudi Arabia is actually and more likely to be much larger. Just as an example, this estimate does not include donations to the House Armed Services Committee members from leftover funds in the campaign committee from former Congressman Howard Buck. A lot of you all remember Buck. While he was working as a registered foreign agent of Saudi Arabia and lobbying for defense contractors. So this is, once again, Saudi Arabian interests has spent more than 24 million to influence U.S. policy and public opinion during the 2018 election cycle. Whoa. Listen, y'all. We are told over and over and over again, Russia. That was disproven, right? I can't really, I mean, we can go over all the ways it was disproven. And I definitely want to cover the fact that it was totally shot down by both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate Judiciary Committee, by the way. But this is open secrets telling you that as a reserved estimation, 24 million was spent in accounted money. That's not including all the money that we know flows in through the back door. But yet the United States is trying to pretend as if they're concerned about foreign agents that don't have our interests at heart taking over our elections, trying to influence our elections, trying to influence our politicians. Saudi Arabia and AIPAC are almost identical. Like the Saudi Arabian PACs and AIPAC and other Israeli lobbying PACs have the same function, which is what Yanamar is trying to point out, which is, we're going to pay you. You're going to let us do what we want to. Not only are you going to let us do what we want to, you're going to pretend that we're the victims. You're going to pretend that we have to do this in order to ensure our survival. And if you step out of line, we will finance your opposition. So Tulsi Gabbard knows what she speaks. Like she's not speaking ignorantly. And these are just a couple of articles, because to go through, I mean, I can go through year after 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 year after, WikiLeaks emails and so many other publications and proof that show Saudi Arabia has a disproportionate amount of influence on our elections. But yet we pretend like they don't do anything wrong, while Venezuela gets consensus from both sides of the political aisle. I don't get it. Oh no, I lied. We get it. It's the money. It's the motherfucking money. Come on, people. You know what I'm saying? Like it's clear that they're not our ally, and yet there are debates about whether or not we should stop allowing Saudi Arabia to use our weapons and stop funding Saudi Arabia and handing them weapons via weapons contractors to commit genocide in an unsuspecting nation that can't do a damn thing about it. Why aren't we there fighting Saudi Arabia right now? That's the real question. Why is Trump allowing this? They try to pretend like the Trump people kill me trying to pretend like, oh, he's joining in to fight Venezuela or fight socialism in Venezuela. He cares about the people. Go fight Saudi Arabia right now then, if you care about the people. It's not about the people. It's about the money. It's not about the people. It's about the natural resources. It's not about the people. It is about the oppression of equity and the equity of opportunity for other countries to be self-determined and to prosper within themselves. Because if they do that, they become competition. And capitalism has never been about increasing competition in a free market. It's always been about suppressing it. We see it with corporations and small businesses where they pay off politicians to basically make it almost impossible for small businesses to eventually catch up to the bigger corporations. And we see it in international politics and international economies where we use these flawed regulations and flawed organizations to suppress other countries from realizing their full potential. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.